Hello and welcome to Nothing But the Truth. On Wednesday, the Narendra Modi government marked 6 months in office. How should we assess its performance? What impact has the Prime Minister had on Indian politics? And what is the future of Congress and the other opposition parties? Those are the two key issues I shall discuss today with India's best-known modern historian, author and commentator, Ramachandra Guha. Ram Guha, before I come to specific issues and subjects, let me ask you for your overall impression of the Modi government in the first 6 months it's been in office.
Well, I think it's very much reproduced the virtues and some of the vices of the Gujarat model, and I'm sure we'll discuss this as we go along. But firstly, of course, one must salute him for his energy. He's hit the ground running. He's been extraordinarily active, traveling all over the world, campaigning for his party, first in Maharashtra, then now in Jharkhand and in Kashmir. And we now have a clearer idea of his administration, especially after the second round of ministerial appointments. And from that, as I said, the Gujarat model emphasizes infrastructure, ease of doing business, fiscal prudence. But it neglects perhaps equally important areas like health, education, and the environment. So what you're really seeing is an attempt to make the Gujarat model, with its achievements and his failures, an all-India phenomenon.
I'll come to that in a very substantial way in a moment's time. But let me begin with something that perhaps has taken everyone by surprise. His sure-footed, confident feel for foreign policy. No one expected this of him. Would you say that in these first 6 months, perhaps his greatest success is in foreign policy?
Well, he's been certainly thinking about it, Karan. I mean, maybe we didn't observe it because we were so focused on his chief ministership and his candidacy, but he had been traveling to Japan, traveling to China. He'd been reaching out to the NRIs. He couldn't meet the American NRIs because he didn't have a visa. So he'd been thinking along those lines. Having said that, certainly, I mean, that has been a surprise, that a person who has been chief minister of a state for so long would take such a keen interest in foreign policy and essentially direct it himself. I mean, perhaps to the extent of making the formal foreign minister somewhat redundant. I mean, there was a lovely photograph I saw in a newspaper the day he came back from Australia and Fiji, where Sushma Swaraj had gone to welcome him at the airport with flowers, and the headline said, "Modi visits India," which was slightly sardonic, but he certainly made foreign policy his pet project.
What do you make of the invitation to President Obama to be the chief guest on Republic Day? Do you see it simply as a significant improvement in the bilateral relationship, or do you think this is also a clear indication of strategic positioning of India on the international sphere?
Well, I think one must look at it in a slightly historical perspective. Between the 1950s and the 1990s, except for a thaw after the China War, relations between India and America were extremely bad. I mean, there's a famous book on our relationship called Estranged Democracies. It started improving from the late 1990s, and the credit is given to George Bush Jr. I think it was Clinton who started the thaw, particularly when he spent 5 days in India and 5 hours in Pakistan. A clear departure from favoritism which previous regimes, American regimes, had shown towards Pakistan. So this is a continuation. I mean, in a sense, it's symbolic because he's the first American president to address Republic Day. But from 1998 onwards, at least at the level of affability, recognition of shared cultural values, the importance of the diaspora, Indian-American relations have been on the upward trend. What this will say about strategic cooperation, economic relations, we'll have to wait and see.
You know, the interesting thing is that the two other heads of government with whom Mr. Modi has in fact established a personal rapport are Shinzo Abe of Japan and Tony Abbott of Australia, and both of them are very close to America. Is there a sense in which you're seeing a strategic four-way relationship emerging? Because Mr. Modi doesn't hide his affinity for the West, for democracy, and for being on the right of the political divide.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, Obama, of course, is not on the right of the political divide. I mean, there's a clear, he's at the moment hamstrung by the fact the Republicans control the Senate and the Congress.
He's left within America, but he's a lot right of the Indian position.
Well, only in the sense that Indian intellectuals have been historically anti-American. But those Indian intellectuals are even older than you and me, Karan. I mean, the younger Indian generation based in India, whether it be intellectuals or professionals, are very much oriented towards America. So I don't think we should read too much into this.
What about Mr. Modi's great speeches in Madison Square Garden, the All Phones Arena? Do you think he's actually fashioned a new tool for foreign policy in these speeches, or is this just a way of boosting his ratings at home?
Well, I think the latter. I mean, I don't think he's a wonderful orator. That's his great gift, and that he showed throughout the campaign. But, speaking to NRIs, having your photograph drawn while the speech is going on. I mean, I found it a little tacky. I think the invitation to Obama, the personal relationships that he's forged with Abe and with Abbott are far more important than hysterical crowds of cheering NRIs. I mean, that's something I don't myself put much store by.
So this is political gimmickry of a sort?
Yes, and it perhaps feeds its vanity. He likes an adulatory crowd. I mean, which politician doesn't like people, lapping his words?
There's been a lot of controversy over Mr. Modi's handling of the relationship with Pakistan. He got a lot of kudos for inviting Nawaz Sharif to his swearing in. Then he got criticized by many when he called off the Foreign Secretary to have talks. Was he right in your eyes to take a hard line on Pakistan's talks with Hurriyat? Or do you think that was an error of judgment that's boxed him into a corner?
It's hard to say because we don't know the inner workings of that decision. How much of that decision was linked to the BJP's electoral plan in the valley, where they would have to take a hard line against Hurriyat. How much of it was actually, offense at what the Pakistani High Commissioner, had done by extending the invitation. So I think it may have been more connected to the domestic political calculations of the BJP, is what I suspect, but really we'll never know.
Let's then come to Mr. Modi's handling of economic policy. Now, he's launched schemes like Make in India, Jan Dhan Yojana, he's increased FDI levels in insurance and defense, he's got commitments of some $55 billion in investment from the Chinese and the Japanese, he's clearly attempted to reach out to American CEOs. As you see all of this, is it giving a new direction to India's economic policy, or is it simply pursuing UPA policies more vigorously and perhaps with more skill?
The latter, and with perhaps with a better equipped team. I think this is something we should discuss this cabinet. Now, in my view, the cabinet ministers who inspire trust, who are capable, competent, forward-looking, are those in charge of finance, defense, power and coal, and railways. So infrastructure and the economy.
And two of those are new.
Yes, so which is why I said now with the second round of cabinet appointments, we have a clearer sense. Also, I would say that the appointment of Arvind Subramanian as Chief Economic Advisor, who was a completely non-partisan choice, and in fact someone who had criticized the Gujarat model in the past, sent a very good signal that we'll get the best minds regardless of earlier affiliations, and also in this case complementing Raghuram Rajan and the IMF. So I think there you have modern, forward-looking, capable a set of reformers who can carry on the UPA's agenda, but with much more vigor, much more cohesiveness, and much more determination.
Within the cabinet, do you see Arun Jaitley emerging as perhaps the most powerful, certainly the most effective of the ministers?
Well, effective is too early to say, but certainly the most powerful and the most autonomous. I mean, it's clear that he can speak to Karan Thapar or anyone else in the press very freely, without looking over his shoulder at what the Prime Minister's office may be saying about him.
The others live in awe of the Prime Minister.
In a sense. So clearly the person who's most autonomous, most authoritative, but his effectiveness we'll have to wait 2 or 3 years to see.
Let me explore this question of Arun Jaitley's effectiveness by asking you this question about Mr. Modi's attitude to economic reforms. Many people say that his response to his political challenges is bold, decisive, courageous. Maharashtra and Haryana, in a sense, proved it. But Mr. Modi and Arun Jaitley's response to economic challenges tends to be cautious, incremental. They look for consensus before they act. Do you share that opinion? Many industrialists are a little disappointed by the lack of pace in reforms.
Well, I think it's too early to say. As I said, he's got a good team. The first budget was very hastily conceived shortly after they assumed office. I think, and you have to also look at the second round of appointments. I think Suresh Prabhu is a good, he had a very high reputation in Mr. Vajpayee's government for being capable and efficient and honest. The last attribute may be perhaps being why he was removed from Mr. Vajpayee's government. So I think it's too early to say, industrialists are impatient. Industrialists are like any interest group. They want every policy to benefit them quickly. They're looking at it from their own narrow prism. From the point of view of the wider economy and society, we have to give this Mr. Modi's economic team, Jaitley and his advisors, some more time.
Do you go with the view that they have time up till the next budget, but if by February, March 2015, some of these second-generation structural reforms are not delivered, or at least not clearly roadmapped, then there will be a sense of disappointment and people will say the Modi government is simply not biting the bullet it needs to bite?
Well, I think one very important reform is GST. a general sales tax. And there, of course, it will be critical how the states are come on board. I mean, the UPA was not, it was again their idea, but they were not able to get the states on board. But I think in creating a single market in India to allow the free movement of goods and commodities, a second important reform would be labor reform, to have ease of access of employment. Now, these are things, the latter may not require the approval of the states. We'll have to wait and see. I'll just say one thing. Of course, Mr. Modi has also been lucky. I mean, the fact that oil prices have gone down so spectacularly.
And inflation because of commodity prices.
Yes. So, but we would have to give the economic team some more time. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because, as I said, it's in that sphere that the people in charge seem to be focused, effective, competent.
Let's come to an area where people have perhaps greater concerns. There are many who say that the choice of Smriti Irani and Ramachandra Khateria, both of whom have questionable educational qualifications, as HRD ministers was a poor choice. Do you share that?
Well, certainly Smriti Irani in her 6 months in office, I mean, Mr. Khateria has just come in. Some people accuse her of being under RSS influence. That's not my problem. My problem is her arrogance and her whimsicality. Ordering programs scrapped without consulting people. There's a very dangerous scheme aboard to make all central universities part of an integrated cadre. So an outstanding teacher in Hyderabad University can be transferred to Pondicherry tomorrow and leaving his PhD students in the lurch. So I think her programs are careless. The ones that she's announced, she hasn't thought about them. Also her arrogance, the stories that are emerging of the way she treats IIT directors. I mean, I can share a personal story without naming the person. One of our most outstanding philanthropists who has spent the last 20 years working on rural education, sought an appointment with her. It was given. Instead of tapping him for experience, she spoke, as my informant told me, for 47 of the 50 minutes of the interview. So, the way she, changing media advisors so often, as if your perception in the media is more important than concrete policy reform. I think these are serious questions. I would also like to say something which is not normally discussed on television and in shows like this, Karan. I think the other real worry I have is the dismantling of environmental safeguards. Delhi is already the most polluted city in the world. Most of our rivers are dead. Aquifers are declining. Reckless open cast mining is causing all kinds of social and environmental dislocation. And this is an area on which the long-term future of the Indian economy also depends. And I think there too, the choice of minister and the actions of the ministry are wholly uninspired.
So here you are suggesting that Prakash Javadekar is actually tilting far too much on the side of industry in their complaints and disregarding key environmental concerns.
Absolutely, which in the long term, water, air, chemical pollution, this is what will depend, our future will depend on this.
Let me come back to Smriti Irani and raise with you a question that perhaps concerns you as one of this country's most eminent historians. What do you make of the appointment of Professor Sudarshan Rao as chairman of the Indian Council of Historical Research, plus the fact that increasingly people like Dinanath Batra are exercising enormous influence, not just in Delhi, but in BJP-ruled states like Gujarat and Haryana as well?
Absolutely, it's extremely worrying. And I was thinking on the similar appointments in the last NDA government. They absolutely weren't so scandalous. The head of the ICHR in the last NDA government was a man called MGS Narayanan from Kerala, who was a non-Marxist but a competent economist. The head of the ICSSR was a non-Marxist but a competent, Narayanan was a competent historian. The head of the ICSSR was a competent economist. The head of the Shimla Institute, appointed by the last NDA government, was the first-rate historian G.C. Pandey. Now, I think Mr. Modi has kept out intellectuals who could advise him. I'll give you a name, Arun Shourie, for example. If Arun Shourie was in the loop, Dinanath Batra would not be running riot. Mr. Sudarshan Rao would not be, running the ICHR, because Arun Shourie could actually have given names of competent people who don't happen to be Marxists.
So this is an area where, in fact, you're not just disappointed by the Modi government's appointments, you're actually quite close to being upset.
Appalled.
Appalled.
I would say appalled.
In that context, let me bring up the speech Mr. Modi made at the inauguration of the Reliance Hospital in Bombay, where he said the story of the elephant-headed god Ganesh or the story of the Mahabharata hero Karan is proof that in past mythological times, India was a master of genetic surgery or of plastic surgery. How do you respond to that?
Karan, this is not new. This is what is taught in, various RSS summer training programs.
But to hear it from the Prime Minister?
I've heard it from the Uttarakhand Health Minister about 8 or 9 years ago. Instinctive, somehow this came out. I hope he regrets it. I hope,
he shows no sign of that.
Well, he's doing many other things. But certainly it was an appalling remark, and I wish, as you wrote in a column at the time, some of our scientists had come out and corrected it. Because we are in the 21st century, you can't be claiming that the ancient Indians had all solved all the problems of medical science.
My last question before I take a break and switch to the opposition parties. Do you believe in these 6 months Mr. Modi has successfully made the transition from Chief Minister of Gujarat to Prime Minister of India? Has he become Prime Minister?
I think so. I think he has made the transition quite seamlessly. He seems quite comfortable in Delhi. He seems quite comfortable interacting with the leaders of the world. He's shown, as I said, a great deal of energy. But as I've already remarked, he seems to be trying to reproduce the Gujarat model at an all-India level, which has its focused emphasis on infrastructure, economic prudence, agricultural growth, neglect of education, health, and the environment. And I think
India will suffer for that.
Well, I think it's an open question. I think other states like Kerala and Himachal Pradesh and Tamil Nadu have done much better on those counts, and perhaps he should consult with scholars of those states to correct this one-sided bias towards economic growth at all costs.
Ram Guha, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to talk to you about the impact Mr. Modi's victory has had on the Indian political system, and also how you see the future of the Congress party, the Gandhi family, and perhaps the whole left bloc. All of that in a moment's time. Don't go away. Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth and an exclusive interview with India's best-known modern historian, Ramachandra. Ram Guha, has the election of Mr. Modi as Prime Minister with a majority of 202, and then his fairly substantial victories in Maharashtra and Haryana, significantly, perhaps even decisively, changed the nature of Indian politics?
Absolutely. And certainly for the next decade and a half, what we're going to see is a single-party dominant system. We had it in the past. The Congress was dominant through much of India, facing only regional parties through the 50s and the 60s.
Now it's the BJP.
Now it's the BJP exactly in a very similar position.
Instinctively, do you feel that in fact what Mr. Modi began on the 16th of May is going to last not just 5 years but possibly a decade?
Yes, I think they're likely to do well. Also Haryana, they've done well. They're likely to do well in some other states that will go to the polls. And the Congress is very clearly on the decline, and I would argue irreversible decline.
Are you also, in addition to seeing a dominant BJP at the center and presumably in most of the states, seeing a shift in the center of Indian politics? Are we moving far more to the right than the Nehruvian consensus had got us used to over the last couple of decades?
Karan, the democratic system sets certain constraints. So, for example, the RSS in the last NDA regime wanted the Rajya Sabha to be replaced by a committee of gurus as elders. Now, no, clearly that's not going to happen. Clearly, we are a land where there are deep divisions between rich and poor. 300 million people estimated still live below the poverty line. So the government will have to focus on social welfare. So I think talk of a rapid shift rightwards in a country like India, with its democratic institutions that have survived 65 years, with its still quite visible mass poverty, I think it's too early to say that.
How significant is the abolition of the Planning Commission?
Well, I tend to agree with it. Now, we have to, because I think it had served its course. There was a time in the 50s and 60s where we wanted to industrialize under state auspices, where we had a unitary model of government. Now the states have to get much more freedom. I don't shed, unlike some of my friends on the left, I don't shed tears for the disappearance of the Planning Commission. We have to see what replaces it.
People often say that the Nehruvian consensus, not just in terms of the country's commitment to socialism or a socialistic policy, but also in terms of the focus on secularism, is diminishing.
Well, Karan, firstly, so I think Nehru's economics was appropriate for the 50s and 60s. It was widely shared across the political spectrum. It is not appropriate now. So, but his pluralism. I don't call it secularism. Pluralism. Linguistic, religious, ethnic pluralism. That's absolutely crucial and must be sustained and deepened. Nehru and Ambedkar were also deeply committed to gender equality. Now, this is another worrying thing. You know, the lack of women in parliament, in major ministries, the rise in violence against women. Now, this is also part of the Nehruvian consensus was also gender equality and religious and linguistic pluralism, and that must be sustained and deepened, even as his economics is jettisoned.
Mr. Modi in the last 6 months has laid a lot of stress on women, women's rights, particularly in the context of how you treat women and in the context of rape. Do you find that a very welcome side of his politics?
Absolutely. I find that a welcome side, but I hope it permeates through the BJP, through the RSS, through the Bajrang Dal, through the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, so that we have a much fuller commitment, much fuller social commitment to those values.
But he was silent on love jihad. He allowed people like Lakshmikant Bajpayee, his own ministers like Kalraj Mishra in the cabinet to carry on saying things which clearly he couldn't have agreed with, but he was silent.
One other thing, he was silent on this. The BJP has also gone silent to the division of UP. You know, I think UP is holding India back economically and socially, and we need it to be divided in 4 parts. But my sense is religious polarization in an integrated UP helps the BJP. That's why they're silent on this.
But are you worried about his silence on love jihad? Is this the case
Not
of
just
putting...
love jihad. I mean, for example, what's happening in Aligarh as we speak.
Complete silence again.
Yeah, I mean, these are extremely worrying. And I hope he recognizes that this kind of policy, while it may get you short-term electoral gains, does deep long-term damage to your society and your nation.
This is the lesson Mr. Modi needs to learn very quickly.
Absolutely. And his advisors, like Mr. Jaitley, need to tell him that.
Very quickly, let's come to the Congress party. It's been decimated in the Lok Sabha. It's reduced to just 44. It was pushed to 3rd position in Haryana and Maharashtra. And if you look at 2016, 2 years down the road, it will have far fewer state governments under its control than the BJP. By some counts, it could be Congress 4 or 5 to BJP's 10 or 11. How deep is the predicament facing the Congress party?
Well, it's an enormous predicament, and they clearly have to reinvent themselves. Rahul Gandhi has to go. I mean, we talked about this about 18 months ago, and it's clear that he's unfit for a leadership role in politics, not just in the Congress party. It's also clear that the charisma of the family is rapidly declining. In an aspirational society, they don't want a kingly class giving them handouts. So I think if the Congress is to survive, Mr. Rahul Gandhi must retire, some other young leaders must come. They may experience a short-term decline because of the kind of withdrawal syndrome. We've been dependent on our family for so long. How can we cope without the mother and the patriarch? But I think if they get into the family, they can revive themselves. Otherwise, they will go the way of the British Liberal Party, a once great national party reduced to insignificance.
That is truly a damning prediction, that if they go the way of the Liberal Party, they will virtually become not just a 3rd party, but they'll become an irrelevance.
A 4th or 5th or 6th party.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Congress shows no sign of Rahul Gandhi leaving. Leave aside pushing him out, he himself shows no sign of retiring. Therefore, is that really becoming the future?
It seems quite inevitable, because he can't revive the party. You know, he's not. It's not as if he could have got the re-election in Maharashtra or in Haryana. He's invisible in Kashmir. He seems diffident, lackluster. I would even say lazy. So the writing is clearly on the wall. Future historians would write appreciatively of the role of the Congress in the national movement, with some appreciation of the Congress's role in building national unity in the 50s and 60s, and then also trace its decline and disappearance.
At the other end of the political spectrum, the left is also in serious decline. But in their case, is this a cyclical downturn, or are they truly and badly out of sync with the new aspirational mood of the country?
The latter. And clearly, like the Congress, they're still sticking. Now, for example, they desperately defend Nehru. When Nehru was alive, the communists attacked Nehru for not being left-wing enough. Now they say he's the only leftist icon we have. Let's have command and control economics. So they're out of touch with young people, what they want. They still haven't abandoned their love for the socialist fatherland, whether it be China or Russia. So like the Congress, the left is going into secular decline, and there's a space waiting to be filled. It may take 10 years, it may take 15 years, but over a period of time, disenchantment with the BJP will grow, and somebody has to capture it. It can't be the Congress, it can't be the left, no, indeed can it be some kind of recombined elements of the Janata Parivar, which has become again a series of family parties. So the Aam Aadmi Party in the long term may be the best hope for an alternative.
Except that at the moment, as you look at the situation, and this may be the situation for the next 10 years, there seems to be no visible, credible opposition to Mr. Modi.
Not just to Mr. Modi, the BJP, because you must not forget that Mr. Modi is in Delhi. The BJP is ruling in the states. The Sangh Parivar with his pracharaks is controlling state organizations. The cultural fronts of the BJP are active in redesigning curriculum and so on and so forth. So it is not a healthy situation for any democracy when a single party is so dominant at all levels.
So at this moment when Mr. Modi and the BJP have awakened for many middle-class Indians a sense of hope, you're actually saying this dominance of one party is not healthy for our democracy. There is a flip side to this.
In the short term, maybe we can live with it. I'm a historian, so my perspective is somewhat more longer term than that of an industrialist who wants quick profits in the next, annual report. So perhaps 5-10 years you can have a dominant BJP, but in this time, some elements of a national opposition with a slightly left of center perspective, not ruled by a single family, not beholden to caste politics, would have to emerge for India to retain its health and vigor as a functioning democracy.
Ram Guha, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Karan.